Hello everyone, welcome back on Wondering Minds YouTube प्लेटफॉर्म। कैसे हैं प्यारे दोस्तों आप सभी। दोस्तों मैं आशा करता हूं कि आप सबको हमारी चलाई गई रैपिड फायर सेशन सीरीज़ पसंद आ रही होगी। दोस्तों आज हम उसका 6th पार्ट यहाँ डिस्कस करेंगे। इससे पहले हमारे जो पेंडिंग 5 पार्ट्स हैं, अगर आपने वो नहीं देखे हैं तो आप उन्हें देख लीजिए और जितने भी पॉइंट्स आपको बताए गए हैं उन सभी पॉइंट्स को आप रट लीजिए, क्योंकि बहुत सारे पॉइंट्स ऐसे हैं जिनमें से PYQs निकले हुए हैं और बहुत पॉइंट्स ऐसे हैं जिनसे अपकमिंग यूजीसी नेट एग्ज़ाम या किसी भी इंग्लिश लिटरेचर के कॉम्पिटिटिव एग्ज़ाम में क्वेश्चंस निकल सकते हैं। प्यारे दोस्तों, इसके अलावा आपको अगर हमारा बताया गया कंटेंट पसंद आ रहा है तो आप हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लीजिए, सेशन को लाइक कीजिए, कमेंट कीजिए और ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा शेयर कीजिए। ज़्यादा टाइम वेस्ट ना करते हुए अब हम अपनी फर्स्ट स्लाइड की तरफ चलें। उससे पहले एक बात और प्यारे दोस्तों, अगर आपने हमारा टेलीग्राम ग्रुप ज्वाइन नहीं किया है तो आप उसे ज्वाइन कर लीजिए, जहां डेली 9 PM फ्री ऑफ कॉस्ट एग्ज़ाम ओरिएंटेड क्विज़ेस कंडक्ट करवाई जाती हैं। पिछले 2 सालों की हिस्ट्री में वंडरिंग माइंड्स ग्रुप से हमेशा 40+ नेट और 20+ JRF निकलते हैं और मैं ये फैक्ट्स के बेसिस पे बता रहा हूँ। अगर आप में से किसी को कुछ पूछना हो तो आप मुझसे डायरेक्टली कांटेक्ट कर सकते हैं और इसके अलावा आप हमारे व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप्स को भी ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं, जिनके लिंक्स आपको डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में अवेलेबल करवा दिए जाएंगे। चलिए अब हम अपना फर्स्ट पॉइंट देखते हैं। अबाउट जॉन मिल्टन, ग्रेट पोएट। John Milton wrote total 25 pamphlets, out of which 21 pamphlets were written in English. He is regarded as the last of the Elizabethans because he shares the spirit of Renaissance, which include humanistic studies and the Reformation. Our next and important point about Anudhati Roy, Indian writer. Anudhati Roy's Booker Prize winning novel The God of Small Things. This is very important work by Anudhati Roy according to net point of view, dear learners. Ends with the word tomorrow. The novel is the story of a Christian family from Kerala. Abhilash Talkies figures in the novel. Our next point is Joseph Addison wrote the poem The Campaign that celebrates the victory of Lord Blenheim in 1704. Our next and important point. फ्रेंड्स, आई थिंक मेरी स्पीड थोड़ी ज़्यादा है, मैं कम कर लेता हूँ। अवर नेक्स्ट एंड इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट, डॉर्थी ऑसबॉर्न, अ हीरोइन ऑफ सैम्यूल रिचर्डसन्स नॉवेल क्लैरिसा, resembles the wife of Sir William Temple. Our next and important point about Francis Bacon, philosophical treatise Advancement of Learning, most important work according to net point of view, as expanded in Latin as De Augmentis Scientiarum. Learn this name, dear learners. This is in Latin. De Augmentis Scientiarum. Our next and important point about Samuel Butler's Hudibras. This is also very important work by Butler. is an English satiric and mock heroic narrative poem from the 17th century. Our next important point is the origin of English drama is contributed to the liturgy. Liturgical drama, dear learners, मे बी इन 2023 मार्च अटेम्प्ट में आपको एक क्वेश्चन देखने को मिल सकता है और एक आई थिंक आपको जून अटेम्प्ट में भी. Again I read, the origin of English drama is contributed to the liturgy, a religious ceremony of the church. Learn this point, everyone. Our next and important point, Mary Lamb appears in Charles Lamb essays under the name of Cousin Bridget. Our next and important point, Walter de la Mare evokes supernatural atmosphere in his poems like The Listeners, Peacock Pie, and The Whale. Much of his poetry was written specifically for children. जो इसकी पोइट्री है वो स्पेशली चिल्ड्रंस के लिए लिखी जाती थी. Our next and important point about Immanuel Kant had a particular influence on S.T. Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coleridge read Immanuel Kant philosophical work, Critique of Pure Reason. Remember this work, dear learners, Critique of Pure Reason, and then wrote his own interpretation of Kant in a book, Allied to Reflection. Walter de la Mare evokes supernatural atmosphere in his poems like The Listeners, Peacock Pie, and The Whale. Much of his poetry was written specially for children. Our next and important point, that is Paul Scott's four novels, known collectively as the Raj Quartet, deal broadly with India during the Second World War and with its uneasy progress towards independence and partition. This is partition work by Paul Scott. Dear learners, our next and important point is Pat Barker's work, The Regeneration Trilogy, is a series of three novels on the subject of the First World War. Our next and important point is A.C. Bradley said that in William Shakespeare's great tragedies, character is destiny. Our next and important point, Elizabeth Gaskell's first novel, Mary Barton, A Tale of Manchester Life, presented the outlook of the industrial workers with sympathy and justice that was sufficient to make some of the employers angry. Now, our next and important point about naturalism was a literary movement or tendency from the 1880s to 1930s that used detailed realism to suggest that social conditions hardly and environment had inescapable force in shaping human character. Our next and important point, L.P. Hartley's Eustace and Hilda is a trilogy of novels which explores a brother and sister's lifelong relationships. Our next and important point about Sir John Cheke, Roger Ascham, and Thomas Williamson were Cambridge Group of Critics. These are the members of Cambridge Group of Critics: Sir John Cheke, Roger Ascham, and Thomas Williamson. Our next and important point about Dr. Samuel Johnson, called Fanny Burney, English novelist, diarist, and playwright, is little character monger. Again, I repeat, dear learners, Dr. Samuel Johnson, called Fanny Burney, English novelist, diarist, and playwright, is little character monger. Now let's come to the next and important point, that is P.B. Shelley called William Wordsworth a moral eunuch, and Robert Browning called him lost leader for becoming Tory. Our next point on Toni Morrison, used male narrator for the first time in Song of Solomon. The main focus of the novel is milkman's story. Our next and important point about Matthew Arnold, it can be called that he is the greatest poet among English critics and greatest critic among English poets. This statement belongs to literary criticism, dear learners. Our next and important point, that is the pamphlet on the Irish conditions, an address to the Irish people, was composed by P.B. Shelley. Next point on Irish Murdoch novel, The Good Apprentice, explores the ideas of character who has hardly any religious faith, but he sets out to be a good person. Our next and important point, that is Charles Ryder is the narrator and protagonist in Evelyn Waugh's novel Brideshead. Our next and important point, that is the largest of the Tagore's 12 novels, Gora, most important novel by Rabindranath Tagore, expresses the writer's deep desire to throw away the foreign rule from India. Our last point of this session, that is J.F. Henry and Henry Trees were the pioneers of the apocalyptic movement. They edited the New Apocalyptic 1942 and the White Horseman 1941. Now that's all, dear learners. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, and for better practices join our Telegram group on Telegram. Links are available in description box. Thank you, dear learners.